Well, it's finally going to happen. I'm going to install shocks and springs on this Focus Mk1. It will make the car ride better, steer better, and more importantly, give it more low. So let's go. Hello Focus friends, so it's finally going to happen. I'm finally going to lower this car. This is going to be a video about installing shocks and lowering springs on this Focus Mk1, plus a few other little parts that I think need replacement. I've gone with some parts that are locally available here in Australia, so let me show you what those are. So this Focus will be getting some KYB shocks and Lovell springs. Now Lovell springs are manufactured here in Australia, so you may not be able to get them, but H&R, King Springs, anything like that will give you the same result if you try this video with different springs. The KYB shocks are a good brand. They're used in a lot of OEM applications, and because the ride is so good on these Focuses, I've decided that I don't really need anything firmer, as it were. I think the ride quality is pretty good on these cars. Really what I'm after is a drop in ride height. So we've got ourselves some lowering springs, and I'll be measuring the car in a minute to see how much of a drop these actually give us. Hopefully they give us some sort of drop, otherwise this will be a waste of time. Now, some of the other things I'm going to do today are replace the tie rod ends, which I think are a little bit worn on my car. I've got some drop links for the front that are definitely worn, so I'll be replacing those. And I've got some top strut mounts over here. It's recommended that these are replaced with the shocks, especially on the front, because they take so much abuse. So I've got some KYB brand strut mounts for the top of the car as well. So there are the rear shocks, here are the front shocks, and these are the springs, front and rear. So here are the part numbers for the springs. That's the front FFL 70SL front springs, and that's the rear FRL 71SL. And here are the shock part numbers as well. So these are the fronts and these are the rear. These are the part numbers for the front strut mounts. Here are the tie rod ends and the front drop links. Okay, now to do this job, these are the tools you're going to need.
Okay, so have a jack and jack stands ready, a couple of blocks of wood for propping up your car, have a pair of spring compressors ready for compressing the springs, a large hammer, a tape measure, some scissors, have a large torque wrench ready to torque everything up when you're done, a 19, an 18, a 17, a 13, and a 12mm spanner. Also get a shifting spanner ready just in case you encounter any larger nuts. Then have a 21, a 19, a 17, a 15, a 14, and a 13mm socket ready. Have a ratchet and some extensions ready as well. An impact gun will be very handy if you've got one. A T45 socket, blue thread locker, a number 6 hex spanner, a couple of flat blade screwdrivers just for prying, a light, penetrating fluid, have some parts cleaner for cleaning parts, some paper towel or rags, a couple of small brushes for cleaning, and of course safety gloves and glasses.
Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do before I jack the car up and get started is measure the ride height of the car right now. So let's have a look. The back is, where is that? That's at 66 centimeters or 26 inches, 66 and a half, somewhere around there. So that's the rear ride height, and then the front is at 67 centimeters or 26 and a half inches. So interestingly, the front on these Focuses is higher than the rear. I'm not sure whether these springs that I'm putting in will level the car out, but we're about to find out. I do hope it will be lower though, otherwise this will be a complete waste of time. All right, let's get this thing in the air. Spiders, always freaking spiders in Australia. This thing's been outside for one day and some spider has already moved in. Alright, now that we've got the wheel off, it's time to get to work. We can see the spring and the shock over here. So we're going to be moving this out of the way, obviously. Now, I'm going to be replacing a couple of other things in here, and one of them will be my tie rod ends. As you can see, we've got a split just there, and my drop links don't look great either. So I'm going to be swapping those out as well. So just consider that when you're in here, you know, just have a quick look before you order parts. And just check that you don't need to replace anything else while you do some suspension work. It'll just save you some time and effort having to dive in here twice. But with all that said, what we're going to do first is just lubricate all the bolts that we're going to be undoing. So once you've got all that stuff lubricated, the next thing will be to remove the caliper and the disc out of the way. You just want to make yourself some room so that you don't accidentally damage something here. And while you do that, these have time to soak and loosen up. So to take the caliper off, we just need to remove the dust boots over here. And then you use a T45 socket to undo these two bolts. There's also a retaining clip just over here which you need to undo. So just careful this doesn't hit you in the face. There we go. Alright, so now that we've got that off, we'll just undo this over here. There it goes. Just find a place to hang it, and I've got myself a small hook here. Okay, so I've got it hooked up just there and out of the way. So now I'm just going to take this disc off. Okay, so I'm going to separate the drop link from the strut tower first. I'm also going to undo the tie rod end bolt. Now, when you change your shock, you don't actually have to change your tie rod end. You don't have to undo this bolt. The reason I'm undoing it now is because mine is broken and I'm going to be replacing that. So I'm going to undo it for now and move it out of the way. And I will also be undoing this bolt because I'm going to change this once the new shock is in. Okay, so you're going to need a 17mm spanner behind it, and that is a 15mm. So with that, we can remove the bracket for the ABS wheel speed sensor. Again, I'm going to be replacing this, so I'm actually going to undo the bottom section as well now and take this out of the way. It's the same deal back here. You've got one bolt, 15mm bolt, and then a 17mm spanner to hold it. And I'm going to slide that out. So now I'm going to undo this bolt. Again, you don't need to do this if you're not changing your drop links, but I will be, so I'm going to take that off. So now that that's off, we're going to put the nut back on. We're going to give this a couple of whacks to get this to separate. There it goes. And that's now loose. Okay, at this point, we've got most things detached from the actual strut tower itself. So the next thing will be to jack up the suspension from a low position over here. This will let us compress the spring so that when we undo this bolt, the suspension will basically lift away.
I've decided not to jack the car up from the end point here because I can see that the ball joint is right there. So I'm just going to move the jack back a little bit. This way, I'm fairly certain that I won't damage this ball joint. So up we go. Don't need to go too far, just enough to compress the spring. So now that the spring is compressed, what I'm going to do is try to put a spring compressor onto this spring. Okay, so now that it's in, just give it a little bit of a turn to make sure that it's snug. Doesn't need to be too snug because once the suspension drops, this will tighten up anyway. You don't want to give yourself more work to do. So now we're going to undo this nut over here, 15mm bolt. Just watch your brake line when you do this. There we go. So now that the spring is compressed by the spring compressors, this strut tower will stay in position, it won't drop any further. So when we drop the hub further down, the shock should pop right out. Of course, a hammer always helps. There it goes. Okay, so now that the bottom of the shock is out, really all we need to do is head up top and undo the bolts. So the bolt in the middle is a 19mm. Okay, so there we go. So that's out. Don't forget to take the top hat off as well. So now we're just going to loosen these spring compressors and we're pretty much done with this setup. There's one thing that we'll reuse and that is this rubber boot. Now the other thing is you've got a top mount for the shock just over there. I'm going to be replacing mine. This just is held on by 3 bolts from the top. So I'm going to undo those now and take this out. So that's going to be a 13mm. So to make sure this doesn't fall down, what I'm going to do is take one out. Like so. And now, while I'm taking the other 2 out, I'm just going to hold onto it with my hand. So that's 2. I'm just going to hold it. When I undo this 3rd one, it should become loose. Yep, there it goes. All right, so now this is ready to fall down, so just reach underneath and grab it. So I've got it with my other hand. And there it is. There's the spring purge or the top strut mount. To be honest with you, it's not in terrible condition, but you just don't know what condition this is going to be in until you take out the shock absorber itself. So I've gone ahead and replaced these because, as you can see, there's a Ford logo right there, which tells me that these are the originals. So it's worthwhile replacing these. They're not very expensive, and you don't want this old part failing on your new shock and spring and having to do all this all over again. So while you're in there, it's just good preventative maintenance to get this swapped out. Okay, so now that we've got the strut off with the spring attached, I'm just going to remove the spring compressors. And you just basically unwind these. And just do them one at a time, incrementally, so little bit by little bit.
When you undo these, never point the springs at you because these might have a chance of breaking. So when they do, you want it to fly away from you as opposed to at you. There we go. So with those removed, you can now take the spring off. So there is our spring, and this is the old shock. So mine's actually in pretty decent condition. The only reason I'm changing these because I want a lower ride height, and I don't know how old these are. Actually, you know what? I can see the original Ford stickers, which tells me that these are probably the original shocks. So these shocks have 100,000 miles on them, or 160,000 kilometers. So they've done their job. It's time for some new ones. So the only thing we're going to reuse in this whole assembly will be this rubber boot over here. So we'll just take that off. They just have some small tabs on the edges here that we need to pry away. And once those are undone, the shock comes away. And here's my bump stop. Mine are actually in really good condition, which is lucky because I didn't order new bump stops. Yeah, I got lucky there. You may want to consider ordering new ones of these as well, especially if your shock is collapsed. So I'm just going to twist this off. There we go. So I'll be reusing that and the dust boot. And that's the old shock, and that's the old spring. So we'll be getting rid of these. Before I do though, I might just bring the new spring over here so that we can see them side by side. Okay, so here is the new spring. And if I just line this up with the old one, you can see the height difference between the two. So we're definitely going to get a ride height drop over here. Now, the only other thing to note is some springs are side specific. So they might have a marking on them to say which side of the car they need to go on. These springs do not, so I'm not too worried about getting the wrong springs on the wrong side. But just check the springs that you buy, whether they be iBarks or anything else, or Lovells like these. But there will be a sticker that tells you if they need to go on a specific side, the driver's side or the passenger side. In my case, they seem to be generic. It seems that this spring can go on either side of the car, so I'm good to put these back on. So I'm just going to move these out of the way and bring the shock over. Okay, so I have my new shock over here. Now, just check that you've got the right side shock to begin with. The front ones are directional, so that what you want to do is that part there will be your trailing arm, so that points to the rear of the car like so. So that points that way. Okay, so that's the top nut. We've got a new one with a plastic washer. So what we want to do is put the bump stop on first. Now if you have a look at this, it actually tells you which side is the top. So that there is the top. So we just put it on the new one like so. Okay, so once that's on there, reinstall the dust cover, and again just put it over the top of the tabs. There we go. So that's now in position. That's looking really good. And basically from here on in, it's really simple. Put the spring back on, and this is the mount for the top for the spring. Sit that into place like so. And this part here will sit in with the new strut top, like so. So we'll put this in the car first, and then we'll go ahead and install this in a minute. So with the strut mount, it's quite an easy process. That is the top section, and this will be the recirculating ring that goes along with it. That's the way it sits, just like so. So that is ready to go in the car. So So to put them back on, it doesn't really matter which side you put where, again, because this spins. So really just feed it in from underneath and then insert the 3 nuts. And there we go. I'm just going to snug them at the moment. I'm not going to torque them down. I'll do all the torquing at the end, but I'm just getting them into position at the moment. So there we go. Strut mount is in place. So what we're going to do is feed in the strut tail with the spring and then position it back into its cradle just there. I may need a spring compressor to compress this spring, but I'm going to try it without first. If I can avoid using a spring compressor, that's always a good thing. But yeah, I think there's no way. This shock absorber is much lower than the actual perch, so I'm going to need to compress this spring. That's a shame. Alrighty, so I thought we could avoid having to compress this being a shortened spring, but I don't think there's a way around it. So we will compress the spring to allow the top of the shock absorber to go through the actual strut mount. I'm not going to compress too many coils. I'll probably stick to this one over here so that I can remove the spring compressor quite easily once it's on the car. Knowing that this is the front, this is facing out towards the wheel. If I place the spring compressor here, and actually I might do it there, I should be able to remove that quite easily. So I'll just quickly wind this on. Let's put the second one on. Yeah, we'll do that many. There we go. We're gonna keep that there. So now we need to tighten this down. So at this point, an impact gun is really helpful. You could do it with a wrench as well. It's just a little bit more effort, but I've got a ratchet gun, so I'm going to use that. Okay, and I'm pretty happy with that. Time to put this on the car. Basically feed this in. Don't forget your spring perch. Alright, I think I can get it there. There we go. Alright, so what we're going to do now is put the bottom bolt in. Just loosely for now. And the next thing I'm going to do is slowly release the spring compressor, driving the shock into the strut tower. And to help me do that, I'm just going to take a jack and lift this up just a little. All the meantime, keeping an eye that strut assembly comes through the top here. So at this point, we're okay to put the nut on. Just like that. Don't need to tighten anything down just yet. So with those nuts in place and this thing being held pretty tightly, we can now start loosening up the spring compressor. Just nice and gentle. There it goes. Alrighty, so as I said, just make sure that your spring perch is sitting on the strut mount. Just give it a good wiggle. Yeah, we're good. Alrighty, so that's it. We've got a new spring and a new shock in. We obviously need to tighten everything up. Okay, so now that that's in and looking good, Before I tighten up the bolts, what I'm going to do is swap out my end link, my drop link, sorry, and I'm also going to change my tie rod end. As I mentioned earlier, this one is, as you can see, correct, and the drop link I removed wasn't much better either, so I'm quickly going to do those. You won't need to do these if you're only swapping shocks and springs, but like I said earlier, take a look around while you're in here. You may as well update things if they are also broken, so you don't have to take your car apart again. So I'm just going to do those real quick now. Alright, so I'm going to start with the drop link here, so it touches there and there. And here is the new one. Now I'm pretty sure it doesn't really matter which way you put this in. There we go. And it comes with new nylon washer infused nuts, so make sure you use the new ones. Alrighty, that's on nice and tight. Next will be the tie rod end. So what I'm going to do is feed this back in, just like so. And then I'm going to undo this nut over here. We all need some lube sometimes. There it goes. So as you can see, once this gets going, it's quite easy to undo. Doesn't take much force. So now that that nut's undone, I can undo this bolt and take off the tie rod end. So what you want to do is count the number of revolutions and put the new unit on with the same number of turns. So let's count the turns. So that's 1, 11.5, 12. So right about there. So it's about 12. So here's the new one, new nylon nut again. And so we want to give this 12 revolutions. 1, 2, 11, 12 revolutions. Alright, let's put this one back in. New washer goes on. Okay. Here's something to note. This is the new nut with the nylon washer on it, and this is the old one. And can you see the difference? There's a bit of a lip on the old one. So I actually prefer the old one because it has this tapered out section that sits really well against the hub. I'm not really liking this because it doesn't have as much purchase as the old factory nut. So I'm going to reuse the factory nut instead, and I'm just going to make sure that it's torqued down really well. It's not ideal because this nylon washer has obviously been used before, but I just don't like the fact that this nut does not taper out. So I'm going to reuse this one, and I might just put a little bit of thread locker on the actual thread as well, just to make sure that it doesn't come loose. And that's going to be a 15mm. So now that that one's back on, we've got our new drop links in as well. It's time to torque down these bolts. So if you change your rod ends like I have, the nut is torqued down to 50 Newton meters. Your drop link or anti-roll bar link is also 50 Newton meters. So these are torqued up. Now it's time to do the strut to the hub. The steering knuckle to strut is 90 Newton meters. Okay, this is the last part. So up top here, we'll tighten these down to 25 Newton meters. This is a 13mm bolt. Now this middle nut is a 19mm bolt, and it should be torqued down from somewhere between 40 and 50 Newton meters. If it starts spinning on you, you may have to start using a spanner and holding the middle with a hex socket, in which case if you can't use a torque wrench, just go as tight as you can basically, and then check it in about a week. So I'm going to go in a couple of stages here. I'll start with 20 Newton meters. And sure enough, I think this is spinning on me. So as I said, this might end up spinning because it's literally the top of the shock absorber. So there's no way for me to torque this down. So the next best thing I can do is take a 19 millimeter to hold the nut. I'll put it over here so you can see. And turning this in the opposite direction that you were just trying to tighten the nut onto. So doing that basically. So you basically keep doing this until it's tight. Now because I'm not going to be torquing this down, there's no way I can reach in there with a socket and a torque wrench without having this thing spin. In about a week I'm going to check for knocks, and I'm also going to give this another tighten just to make sure that nothing's come loose. One thing that would be really good to have here, which I don't have, is a ring spanner set, because it would reach this nut a lot better than what I can do with this straight spanner. But we're locked down in COVID and I can't go outside, so I can't buy the right spanner. But I think this will do the job. And you can feel when the nut bottoms out, because basically everything comes to a stop. In fact, I'm pretty sure I'm bending this tool now, so I'll stop. But that's that bottomed out. I've also bent my tool. Can you see that? Buy good tools, everybody. Okie dokie, so we're good up here. The only thing left to do is put things back together. So I'm just gonna do that real quickly now. All right, I'm just gonna release the jack. I'm going to reattach. I'm going to reattach the ABS cable. The bracket for which is on the old drop link, so yeah, don't forget the bracket. Bracket goes back on. This is why it pays to go slowly, people. Stops you from doing things twice. And now we can mount the ABS cable back on. There we go. Don't forget the back one. All right, ABS cable is back on. Time to remount the disc. And let's get the brake caliper back on as well. So you've got your T45s at the rear, 2 of them. And the torque setting's not very high on these, it's only 30 Newton meters. Dust boots go back on and bottom. And finally, we'll just put this back on. Just watch your fingers, of course. There we go. And really, that's about it. The shock, the spring has been replaced, so has the drop link and the tie rod end. Wheel back on, and the front suspension is done. Oh, except for the other side. But I think I'll do that on my own. You don't need to see this again. Alrighty, so let's see what we've got here. I'm ready to drop the car off the track and see if this thing is any lower. It should be. And it's not. It's not lower. No, look, the reason for that is the car's been up, so it's going to take a little while for the springs to settle. It might take a day or two. I'll measure it now, and then I'll measure it again in a couple of days, and let's see what we've got. Drop, damn you. Okay, so we're at 66.5 centimeters, or just over 26 inches, which is a 5mm drop. Yay. No, I'm pretty sure this will drop a little further. Fingers crossed anyway. But it's bound to handle better, that's for sure. Alrighty, so the fronts are done and let's get to the rears. So one of the first things you're going to want to do is jack up your front wheels. Your e-brake will not be working because the back wheels will be in the air. So make sure that you chuck up the front wheels so that your car doesn't roll away. Okay, so now that the front wheels are supported, it's time to take the wheel off, and to do that, we're going to jack it up. So with the rears, unlike the fronts, we do not have to remove the calipers or the discs. We've got heaps of room to work with in here. So it's just a bolt for the shock down the bottom and one up the top. We'll be opening the hatch in a minute and unbolting this. So while you're in here, just have a look at everything and make sure that you don't need to buy some other parts. So check all your bushings and nothing's rattling. Just check all these bushings. Mine seem to be in pretty good condition. Yeah, nothing's rattling there. That's all fine. Here we go. So check this one out. This one is pretty much torn. And this is the bushing for the rear sway bar link. So we'll need to undo this bolt anyway to be able to get this spring out. And as you can see right there, this bushing on the rear sway bar link is torn. So we'll be ordering a new part of those. So yeah, just while you're under here, just check everything and make sure that you don't have to come back and swap something else out. And I do. I'm going to replace these end bushings here on the sway bar link. Alrighty, so the first thing we're going to do is get this shock out. Now to do that, we're going to open the hatch. Okay, so at this point, what you want to do is just give yourself some room. So we'll be removing this bottom carpet here and also this sound deadening material on the side here. This is where your rear shock tower is positioned, so we'll be removing this. And to do that, it's quite simple. You've got this yellow kind of retaining ring over here that we'll be taking off. And also there's a couple of clips on the side here, just there and there. You don't need to take them out, just loosen them so that your carpet slides out like that from behind there. And there is the top of your shock tower. So it's just a nut that you undo here. This will spin, so give it some WD-40 and then using a shifter you're going to hold onto the perch and then undo this nut. It should come out quite freely actually. So let's loosen that now. So what you're going to need is a 13mm. Just hold on to the top perch with a shifter like so. There it goes. Alright, so just leave a few threads on there because once we undo the bottom bolt, we don't want this to fall through. So this will just hold it in place for us for the moment. Alright, let's head underneath. So we're pretty much ready to get the rear shock out. And that is just one 15mm bolt right there. Okay, so we could undo that now, but just to make things easier, what I'm actually going to do is undo this control arm over here and take the spring out. That will just give me better access to the shock. So that's a 15mm, so is the shock. There's 15. And to undo this, which we'll do first, You'll need to hold the top with a 13mm and undo the bottom nut with a 14mm. So these things are quite mangled on both sides, so I'll be replacing these pretty soon. If your sway bar won't swing down, just undo a couple of these bolts. Now that that is out of the way, we can now drop the control arm. So the next thing we're going to do is put a jack there to compress the spring. Then we're going to undo that bolt. A 15mm goes on there. The bolt should come out. So now there's not much holding this control arm in place except for the spring. So we're going to gently lower this down, very gently, very slowly. There we go. The tension is off the spring, so you should be able to just push this down and remove the spring. So there's the old spring. Now just be careful because as you saw, the spring perch from the top fell out, so you will need to put this back in with the new spring. So now that the control arm is free, we've got good access to the bolt back here. Now before I undo that, I'm going to go up top and I'm going to finish removing the top nut from this shock absorber. And just hold the top of the shock. Okay, with the nut removed, you might also want to give this a bit of a look. Make sure that nothing is torn or broken. Mine is looking fantastic. I'm just going to give it a quick wipe down, but that's good to go back on with the new shock. Alright, let's go underneath and undo the last 15mm bolt. So we're going to undo this last bolt. There it is. And now you should be able to slide down and remove your shock absorber, but it's not coming out. So let's see why not. Alright, I've got a feeling that it's these plastic retaining clips, and once I undo those, this thing will drop to the floor. Alright, so what's happening here is this up here is the rear bump stop, and as you can see, mine is in terrible condition. So that is being held in by those plastic clips up top, and the reason the shock wouldn't drop down is because the bump stop was holding in the shock using this little lip. Now ideally you want to replace this. I mean, look how bad this is. This is completely deteriorated. I actually don't have a replacement right now, but it's very, very easy to remove this shock. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to put the new shock in with these, but I'm obviously going to buy new versions of these and have them replaced. That's yeah, that's terrible. I'm just going to take these out now. So I think to do that is a simple case of pushing these in like so, and then I should be able to just pull this free. Not ideal. Unfortunately, I don't have a replacement for this part, so I'm going to reassemble the suspension using this bump stop. But there is something there. There is material here to dampen the shock absorber if it ever does travel so high. You know, it's not completely deteriorated. Well, actually it is. This needs to be replaced, so make no two mistakes about that. And I'll be replacing that. But to finish this video, I'm going to reinstall this and pretend that this is fine. Now, it's obviously not fine. I'll be reordering these and swapping them out at a later date. But in order for me to finish this video, I'm going to put these back on and I'm just going to pretend that these are fine. Okay, I have my parts all cleaned up and I have the suspension area tidied up as well on the car. So what you're going to need is a new shock, of course, and that new shock comes with a new nylon nut for the top. Make sure you've got your bottom nut ready to go as well, so that's a 15. I've got my bump stop ready as well, and the shield, the cover for the shock absorber. I'm making a note of the part number, which is located here, because I will be replacing this later for obvious reasons. So we'll put the shock in first, and then once that's in, we'll get the springing. Now, interestingly, the spring is not progressive. It looks like you could put this in either way, this way or this way. The gaps between the springs seem to be about even, and so is the diameter of the spring top to bottom. Make sure you've got your top perch ready to put on, but let's start with the shock. So let's go and put that in the car, and the first thing to do is to put this onto this and then move this as a whole unit into the car. Yeah, so crusty. Okay, so back at the car, we're going to feed the shock in through and up the top of the hole. So I'm just being super careful because I don't want to tear this any more than it already is. But that's kind of it. You feed it through like so. There we go. So now that that's being held in place, we can put the bottom bolt in. Okay. So now that that's in, we just got it down snug. We'll talk everything down in a second, but let's head up top and put the top nut in. So after a little scrub, let's put this back on. There we go. I've just got it started. I won't tighten it up just yet. I'm going to go underneath, put the spring in, and once I've got the suspension up on a jack, then I'll tighten this down. Okay, with the new shock in place, it's time to put the spring in. I'm going to pick this side to be the top, and I'm going to drop this down, put the spring in. Now what you're going to need is the jack underneath here to recompress the spring so that you can put the bolt in. Okay, let's torque this bolt down, and the torque setting is 115 Newton meters. And now that we've got the spring in place, it's held on nice and tight, the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to torque this bolt down to 90 Newton meters. Finally, just compress your spring, and what this will do is compress the shock. So now you know that your shock is as compressed as it can be, you can tighten down this nut. And this doesn't need to be super tight. You'll feel it bottom out. Now there is a torque setting for this, but to be honest with you, it's going to be quite hard for you to torque this down to the right setting, considering that you got to hold the top here. So just give it a good snug tighten and you should be good. This is a nylon nut, so it's not going to undo. Just make it nice and tight. Alrighty, and with that, the top of the strut, the bottom of the strut, and the spring is back in place. Now at this point, you're pretty much done with installing your springs and your shocks, and it might be tempting to start putting your sway bar back in, but don't forget you've got to do the other side, and to do the other side you still have to have your sway bar undone. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to go to the other side of the car, I'm going to install the shock and the spring over there, and when that is done I'll put the sway bar back on. So I'm going to get to it. Okay, that's two sides done. So now that both sides are done, 1, 2, now it's going to be a good time to put your sway bar back on. So to get things started, just get the 4 bolts in place. One of the easiest mods to do on your car is to put a thicker sway bar on the rear. It will reduce understeer on your car. So that's 4 bolts, and then all we've got to do is put these back on. Super easy. Just going to tighten these down, and that of course is 13 millimeter. Okay, and the torque on these is 50 Newton meters. With the sway bar torqued in, it's time to put the end links back in. The nut is on top, and so is this. This goes in the middle. Just like that, feed it through the hole, nut on the top. This is cracked here as well, so we'll get some new bushes on the end of these. In fact, while I'm at it, I might as well change the sway bar. So stay tuned for a video about swapping out this sway bar. Alright, so with that in, I'm not going to torque it down. What I'm going to do is put the wheels back on and drop the car back on the ground, and then I'll torque these down. I mean, these are shot anyway, so it doesn't really matter, but people always say to torque down your bushings once the car is on the floor, so that's what I'm going to do. But before I do, I'm just going to put the other side back on too. So that's kind of it for the rear. Just double check all of your work. Everything is tightened up. New shocks in, make sure that you've got all your bolts in, up top as well. And if you're fairly confident that everything's good and tightened down, which I am, it's time to get the car on the ground. So there we go. Once again, we're too high, but I think that's just the spring. Give it a... Let it settle. We're getting there. Alright, so now I'm just going to check these top 2 bolts. Now that there is actual car weight on the top of the shocks, I'm going to double check these. And the other thing I'm going to do is tighten up the sway bar bushings. God, the world's longest bolts. Yeah, still going. Honestly, check this out. Why? Why make the bolt so long?
And finally, get the lining back in your car, including the floor carpet, and stare. Wonder. Admire your work.
Highly recommended. Absolutely a great upgrade over stock. If you're thinking about upgrading your springs to something a little bit firmer, I think this is a good compromise between track hard, coilovers, and the OEM feel. This really is a nice balance. So all in all, this took me about a full day to complete. So give yourself that amount of time. Or if you haven't done this before, maybe give yourself a whole weekend just so that you can check everything over and go nice and slowly. The car is a lot sharper. It's a lot sharper to turn in. It rides a lot flatter. The trade-off is it's a little bit bumpier, but I don't mind that. I'm looking for a firmer ride. I want my car to have a lot of feedback, and this definitely gives me that. There is one thing left to do in this process, and that is to go and get a wheel alignment, which is where I'm going now. You've touched the suspension, you've touched the steering geometry, so it's always advised that after you do that, you go and get yourself a wheel alignment. So that's the last step in this process. But all in all, a very nice mod. You can definitely feel the difference, and that's always a positive. Great turning. So it turns in so well. Yeah, really, really sharp. Look at that. No tire squill, nothing, nice and flat. If you like what you saw today, please click the like button to let me know and let YouTube know that I've done the right thing here and you're happy with the result. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing to the channel to see more DIY videos that you also can do in your garage, just like I have done right now. If you feel that I should have done something differently, or if you can somehow add to the steps that I've outlined in this video, please write them below for everybody else to see, if you think it will help other people out with changing their shocks and their springs on their Ford Focus Mk1. But with all of that said, that's enough chit chat from me. I hope you like what you saw, and if you did, go ahead and try this on your car.